Hey everybody, I got a book review for you today. Yeah, I read a book I wanted to share with everybody. Wyatt Earp, The Life Behind the Legend by Casey Tefertiller. I think it's Tefertiller, I'm not sure. I tried to look it up on the internet before I did the video and I couldn't find a pronunciation of it. And so I apologize to Mr. Tefertiller. I doubt he's watching this, but I apologize to him if I mispronounced that. Making an attempt there. And so, but at any rate, this book, biography of Wyatt Earp, that really tries hard to sort out the actual Wyatt Earp, sort of pull him away from the myth and the legend and talk about the real actual man. And anybody who's known me for a long time knows I'm very interested in Western mythos. Big fan of John Wayne and Clint Eastwood and Western film, and I'm also a historian, so I've read a lot of Western history. And so this book intrigued me, taking one of those Western bigger than life characters and sort of bringing them down to earth and making them more human and talking about the human element of them. And the author Casey Tefertiller does a really interesting thing with his research in this book. He basically took all the accounts of it, even the most sensational, fictionalized ones, and sort of brought them together to sort through them and decide what really happened, how did these events really take place, what was Wyatt Earp really like in that time and place. And so I admit, in reading this book, there are some moments where it drags on a little bit, where you're sort of going through an event again and again and again as you're getting all these different accounts. I'm sure in Mr. Tefertiller's research he had even more to go through. He's only sharing with you the very best. But it does, for a reader, sort of bog down at times on one event, but it's always interesting because it is always the various perspectives and how it does really shake out. So what does this book say about Wyatt Earp then? So what is, in this extensively researched, very well put together book, what does Mr. Tefertiller actually say about Earp? Well, the impressions I got from the book were that Earp was a competent lawman when he was in Kansas. So early in his career, people know he's in, Wichita and Dodge City, and he's really a competent lawman. He's hired as a deputy, in most cases deputy marshal, and you have these cowboys coming from Texas, right, and they're off the trail, and they get a little drunk, they get a little rowdy, they shoot things up, they make life in town a little miserable. And here's Earp, who's a really solid head knocker. He's really good at knocking heads. And he takes these young guys who are otherwise decent citizens and, puts them down, throws them in the drunk tank, gives them a night sober up, and then sends them on their way. And that's kind of how he operated. And he got involved in some more spectacular incidents, but nothing too major while he was in Kansas, I would say. Nothing like he's going to get involved with later. But in Kansas, he's competent. He knows what he's doing. He knows how to sort of settle these guys down. These guys, they're kind of beyond reason because they're usually pretty drunk, and so you just give them a good swat, get them out of the way, give them a chance to sober up, and then they're fine. Send them back to Texas. But then he goes to Arizona, and Wyatt Earp considers himself a gambler and a speculator and a capitalist, and so he's trying to do all these things, but he finds himself caught up in what is actually a lot of political intrigue. Like, that's the thing that really interested me, is that the famous feud between the Earps and then the Clanton-McLaury cowboy gangs, which isn't a really solid gang. Like, those gangs, like Curly Bill Brocious and John Ringo and the other famous people, aren't really all together in one gang. They just happen to represent a similar interest in rustling cattle and robbing stagecoaches. It's kind of a growing trade there, and these are the people that do it. They're not necessarily all together, but that group is all from Texas mostly, and they're all Democrats, and so they support Democrats, like John Behan, the famous sheriff in Tombstone. He's a Democrat, and he's with those guys to that extent because they're all politically allied. And then the Earps, they're from the north. They're from Illinois, and then they lived in California, and then of course Kansas. So they're all Republicans. So they all line up on the Republican side of the ticket. And so that's actually where their friction starts. Is they're on different sides of the political spectrum. And Johnny Behan wins the sheriff's race, and he's supposed to appoint Wyatt as undersheriff, and he doesn't. He undercuts him for another Democrat. And then so things kind of heat up and get ugly between everybody, and nobody's getting along. It's sort of this slowly boiling thing where political rivalries by hard men like these guys, unlike the Kansas Cowboys, who were decent guys who just needed to sober up, there's some real bad guys here. Curly Bill Brocious and John Ringo are probably both fairly legitimate bad guys. Like, they have no problem with the whole shooting a person. That doesn't bother them. Stealing and shooting are not irksome things in their mind. It doesn't weigh on their conscience. And so, does that make the Earps, like Virgil and Wyatt and the whole clan that's there, Morgan? There's actually quite a few Earps. There's Warren, James, and I know I'm forgetting at least one of the Earps. The oldest one, Newton, who actually doesn't go to Tombstone. But does that make the Earps complete good guys? No, not really, because they have their interests in mind too. Right? There's definitely not on altruism in what they're doing. There's a self-interest in what they're doing, and so you have two groups with self-interest sort of clashing, and sort of with the toughness and fortitude to actually go to war over it. And then what happens at the OK Corral is controversial. When Morgan Earp gets killed, there's controversy there about who did it. And then when Wyatt, pins on a U.S. Deputy Marshal badge and goes on his famous revenge ride and kills 3 or 4 people, that's controversial. And so the whole thing is really modern. I suggest reading the book. I really do. If you're interested in this subject, this book is great. This book will answer a lot of those questions about what actually happened and how it actually went down. And then it goes into the rest of Wyatt Earp's life post-Tombstone and the famous shoot at the OK Corral, and how he sort of went about his business after that. And he actually got caught up in a couple more controversies before his life was all said and done. And there are, it's interesting that those who swept him down, he was the bad guy in the whole series of events in Tombstone. There's those who swept him down, he's a good guy in the whole series of events in Tombstone. But the point is that this is a well-researched book. It's a very interesting book. It makes you realize all the movies are not very factual. The closest one is the movie Tombstone. Actually, there's quite a few of the events in the book that take place in the movie. And he even says in his book, the Casey Tefertiller, the author, says that the writer of the film Tombstone intended that to be a historically accurate film, but then Hollywood got a hold of it, and they broke some of the stuff up, and they made it more violent, and they made the revenge ride different. And so it sort of lost a lot of its factualism, but it was originally based in the more fact-based story that you would find in this and other research materials. So the point is that I recommend this book. If you're interested in the life of Wyatt Earp, this is a great book, and I really enjoy the research method, and it's a really solid read. So that's it from here. I hope that gives you a little historical perspective.